Khmer-Krom Federation and the Khmer-Krom Temple. Madam Chair, we thank the Permanent Forum for the study by Madam Chair that sheds light on the important cross-border issues for Indigenous people. It highlights the need for good bilateral relations among nations with Indigenous communities whose members are spread across borders. We'd like to see further studies include Asia. Therefore, we recommend the following. 1, we encourage the Permanent Forum experts to conduct or facilitate research specific to Southeast Asia regarding the impact of cross-border issues faced by Indigenous peoples living in Southeast Asia. Indigenous people are impacted by new borders imposed on them. 2, we urge the Permanent Forum experts to collaborate with Indigenous representatives from Southeast Asia to synthesize a joint report and recommendations for states to consider when encountering cross-border issues. And 3, we ask the states whose Indigenous peoples are isolated by political borders to include Indigenous peoples' rights as part of bilateral relations policy. Merely having good bilateral relations does not necessarily mean that the issues are solved for Indigenous peoples. It must also be a precondition that all states involved take serious measures to respecting the rights of Indigenous people, particularly in respect to Article 36 of the UNPFII, the right of Indigenous peoples to remain and maintain and develop contact with their own members as well as other peoples across borders. The rights to freedom of movement and contact across borders is also protected by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in such articles as Article 12 and 27. In 2007, a Cambodian monk of the Khmer-Krom religion was arrested in Cambodia and deported to Vietnam for trial and sentencing, solely for the crime of having contact with outside Khmer-Krom rights organizations and providing shelters to other Khmer-Krom indigenous people in Cambodia fleeing Vietnam. This conclusion between states is common in Southeast Asia, where one could be prosecuted for connecting with members across borders because it undermines the state's partnership. Members are also isolated across national boundaries. Cross-border contact is very important to Indigenous people in their attempt to preserve the identity and culture. These contacts may manifest in religious ceremonies, like the Buddhist Katin ceremony of giving robes to monks at different temples. For the Khmer-Krom indigenous peoples of the Mekong Delta, neither side of the border can come and go freely to partake in ceremonies without some form of surveillance, intimidation, or harassment by the Vietnamese government. To the Montagnards or the Dagar people of Vietnam Central Highland virtually have no contact with their brethren in the northeastern region of Cambodia and vice versa on the cultural sphere. They have lived and traded with one another prior to any current recognized international border today. Cultural contacts in the past have been discouraged because it has been seen as a threat that will lead to disharmony for the nation's various ethnic groups that will lie within Vietnam. The livelihoods of the indigenous peoples across Southeast Asia are dependent on lands and ecosystems that span across many borders. The Khmer-Krom of South Vietnam are dependent on the Mekong Delta and the Mekong River, which streams across Burma, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Construction of the Xayaburi Dam in Laos threatens to disrupt the Mekong River and the small rivers and lakes that it feeds into. On the Black River, which is the main life source for the Thai people, 3 massive hydroelectric dams were built. The Hoa Bin Dam operated in 1994, the Sun La Dam in 2012, and the Lai Chau Dam to be completed by 2017. This has already overrun rice fields, displacing 200,000 Thai people on barren hillsides. These are only a few examples that will greatly harm indigenous peoples of Southeast Asia, as well as disseminate agriculture and fisheries, restrict trade and movement, and force indigenous peoples to resettle. We hope to see the future studies of indigenous peoples of Southeast Asia that are incorporated within the cross-border studies. Thank you.